Y'all, we need to talk because a full-blown corporate cage match cluster muck has exploded in the theater of public display. December 5th, 2025, it was announced that Netflix was penning a deal to buy Warner Brothers Discovery's studio and streaming business for roughly $72 billion. A deal that, if regulators sign off on, sees Netflix gaining Warner Brothers Pictures, HBO, Max, DC, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, The Conjuring series, and essentially the crown jewel library of classic movies that WB owns. Now, I say a lot of that tongue in cheek, but the reality is this isn't just streaming drama. Outside of being a content creator, I am a serial entrepreneur. And the one thing that I've come to understand is that law around entertainment properties is weird. You hear the monopoly that is building around Netflix. And if you know anything about monopoly law, it in your mind should be an open and shut case. But there are situations and circumstances that disprove that these cases are always slam dunks and go the way that it looks like it absolutely should. The reality is, this is about something deeper because of what we are looking at for the future of entertainment, cinema, things like that. We are talking about something that, if a certain series of events takes place, could very reasonably result in the death of the theatrical experience as we know it, the slow strangling of physical media, and one company having a chokehold on what movies get made, how you watch them, and whether they even survive. Because the thing that not everybody realizes about the post Netflix streaming world that we live in, unless you are on movie YouTube or you are paying very close attention to the streaming services that you have, you realize that you have access to all of these movies, but these movies that are owned by these companies just as easily get stuck in a vault, or they get edited away from their original version so you get the version that that company wants you to have. That is the precedent that already exists. So it's not a very far leap to say that this is something that could very reasonably have a big impact on the future of movies. So, what's the deal on paper? Netflix has signed a cash and stock agreement to buy Warner Brothers Discovery Studios and streaming operations. So, again, that's Warner Brothers Pictures, that's HBO, that's DC, and that's Warner's TV production arms. A massive back catalog of films and series. The stuff that Netflix isn't buying, it seems, is the legacy cable channels: CNN, TNT, TBS, Discovery, HGTV, etc., things like that. So, for the small Venn diagram of people that are going to be watching this that are also wrestling fans, no, that means that the two big wrestling companies in the States are not going to end up owned by the same people. Those are going to get spun off into a separate publicly traded company called Discovery Global that's currently being valued. Deal is expected to close between 12 and 18 months if regulators approve it. And after that, cable spinoff is completed likely in 2026. Netflix is so confident that this is going to happen that they agreed to a multi-billion-dollar breakup fee if regulators kill it. So, on the other hand, if Warner walks away and takes a different offer, they also owe Netflix a huge check as well. So basically, the idea here is that they're tying themselves together so tightly that somebody is going to bleed money if this deal fails. So, baseline: Netflix, Warner Studios, HBO Max as one mega platform, and the older cable stuff pushed into a side company, basically left to sink or swim on its own. And then, just as everybody started processing that, you've got Paramount entering the chat. Paramount launches an all-cash hostile tender offer, $30 per share for all of Warner Brothers Discovery, valuing the company at roughly $108 billion, and going directly to shareholders instead of negotiating nicely with Warner's board. The message from David Ellison was that Warner took the wrong deal. Netflix's bid is risky, heavily regulated, partially in stock, and doesn't even buy the entire business. We're offering more cash, more certainty, and we'll get this past regulators faster. Then you add on the political component, which makes it even more messy. Netflix is already under fire from the president, basically saying that the deal could be a problem because of the market share. And then meanwhile, Paramount's bid is backed in its own level of controversy and muck. So now Warner shareholders have to decide: stick with Netflix's cash and stock deal that cuts out the cable networks and faces brutal antitrust scrutiny, or take Paramount's all cash hostile offer, which fuses two big studios and comes with eye watering levels of debt and obvious political entanglements. Either way, the people with the most stake creatively, filmmakers, theater owners, workers, are basically strapped to the hood of somebody else's car. So if Netflix actually ends up owning Warner Brothers and HBO, why is this such a big deal? Why does everybody seem to be going bug nuts over this whole thing? Netflix is already the largest subscription streaming service in the world, with hundreds of millions of subscribers. Now imagine that same company also controls one of the big five legacy studios, as well as HBO. Analysts estimate that a combined HBO and Netflix could control around 30% or more of US subscription streaming markets, depending on how you define competitors. So, put in plain English, one company would own the biggest streaming platform and a 100-year-old studio library that includes some of the biggest tentpole IPs in entertainment. Now, I want to be clear that this isn't just YouTubers being dramatic here. Lawmakers on both sides are already calling this an antitrust red flag. The DOJ has said that it will investigate the deal thoroughly. And Hollywood unions, writers, actors, directors have all issued statements warning that this deal means fewer jobs, lower pay, less competition, and less creative diversity. In several forms of entertainment, we have seen what it means when one organization is unrivaled within a particular space. I want you to think through the after effects of most, if not all, of the examples that might come to your mind. And generally, at some point in the conversation, you are going to find the story that they were not in competition. They did not have to keep up with anyone else creatively. They weren't being pushed, they weren't being challenged, and thus things stagnated. Now you're talking about hundreds, 100+ years worth of movies at stake in all of this, coupled with an entire rewriting of the landscape. Now we have to talk about theaters because Netflix already has a documented attitude about them. Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos has repeatedly said that the traditional movie theater model is outdated and outmoded. At the Time 100 summit this year, he doubled down, basically arguing that audiences would have voted with their feet. They want to watch at home, and that the romantic idea of long theatrical runs and sold out shows is over. That's not just a preference, that's a philosophy. And now that philosophy is about to be welded onto Warner Brothers, the studio that gave us some of the most important movies in cinema history. And critics aren't being quiet about this. Theater trade groups are warning that a Netflix Warner combo could slash the box office by double digits because Warner's slate is a big chunk of what keeps multiplexes alive. A group of anonymous A-list filmmakers sent Congress a letter saying Netflix would hold a noose around the theatrical marketplace if this deal goes through. Netflix's track record also backs up the fear. They give most of their movies little to no theatrical run. What they do when they do a theatrical release, it's often limited and short, just enough to qualify for awards or generate some marketing buzz. They've never had a theatrical first model. Their business model literally doesn't prioritize theaters. So what happens when the biggest streamer in the world owns a studio whose films used to be a lifeline for theaters? Realistically, it's fewer titles that get wider release. The ones that do might have shorter windows, and smaller to mid-budget movies could and probably will just go straight to streaming. While all of that is incredibly important, there's another layer to this that doesn't seem to get talked about nearly enough in mainstream coverage. That's physical media and film preservation. Warner Brothers has historically been one of the biggest players in 4K remasters, big box sets, and collector's editions, licensing catalog titles to boutique labels like Criterion, Arrow, Shout, etc. That world is already shaky in the streaming area. But Netflix's stance has been no real physical media strategy. Most originals never hitting Blu-ray, titles getting pulled with a keystroke for cost saving or tax write-offs. Now imagine that mindset controlling Casablanca, The Exorcist, The Shining, the entire DC catalog, big modern horror runs, future tentpoles. Critics, industry folks, and even op-eds in mainstream outlets are flat out saying Netflix buying Warner is bad news for anyone who cares about theatrical cinema and archival film culture. Under a Netflix-owned Warner, why would they license out their biggest titles to boutique labels when they can hoard them as exclusive streaming bait? Why invest in deluxe physical editions when their CEO literally calls that kind of thing clutter and outdated? Why preserve the exact theatrical cuts when you can always update and remaster and re-edit or censor something quietly on the platform? That last part is huge. We've already seen streamers remove episodes over controversy, swap out versions, and nuke entire titles overnight. When everything lives on one corporate server, you don't own your movies. Even the ones that you buy online, all you're doing is buying a license for that movie. If they pull it, you have zero control. Handing that level of control over one of the largest film libraries in history to a company that fundamentally does not believe in physical ownership, that is a nightmare for film preservation. Now we have to talk about the human side. Workers, creators, Hollywood unions have been unusually unified on this one. Statements from the WGA, SAG-AFTRA, the Directors Guild, and others all basically say the same thing, that this will eliminate jobs, it will lower wages, and it will reduce the volume and diversity of content. Because consolidation lets the mega company close overlapping divisions, fold different development pipelines into one, push take it or leave it deals on directors and writers, and below the line crews because there are fewer buyers left in town. And their behavior with original programming doesn't inspire any level of confidence. Now, to be fair, none of the bidders here are saints. The Paramount Warner tie up would also mean two big studios merging, lots of layoffs, and a ton of debt. Political connections on the Paramount side, Ellison money, foreign sovereign funds, Kushner, they raise their own red flags about news, information, and who gets favorable treatment. So this isn't Paramount equals good, Netflix equals bad. It's more like Paramount is a classic studio trying to get bigger to survive. Netflix is a tech-driven platform that has never believed in theatrical or physical media, controlling a 100-year-old film library. Both scenarios are rough, but the Netflix outcome is uniquely dangerous in a few specific ways that the Paramount one just simply isn't. So is all of this just doom and gloom? Are we doomed to watch cinema quietly die in a terms of service update? Not necessarily. There are a few pressure points, though. We need to pay attention, and we need to speak up. This deal still needs regulatory approval in the US, in Europe, and other places. There has to be antitrust hearings and public comment periods. So if you care about this, you can contact your representatives and say, in good terms, that you're worried about media consolidation and want strict scrutiny on any Netflix Warner merger. Then support your local theater. I personally have a small independent nonprofit theater near me, and there are other big box theaters that we do go to from time to time. But when it's apples to apples, or when we have a choice, we're going to pick the independent one because that's something that we want to support because it it continues to give lifeblood to the community, to this idea of this small theater, and going there is nostalgic. It just is. It brings you back to that classic movie going experience that so many of us have so many memories tied to. And the reality is, we vote with our buying dollars. Support theaters, support independent creators, support film festival movies that make it onto the big screen, support non franchise IPs. So that way, there is a loud statement made that we care about creativity and support film preservation, support the idea of physical media and companies preserving what is created. A lot of you guys are horror fans. There are a lot of boutique labels that are re-releasing classic movies on physical media. Between that and the normalization of Facebook Marketplace and estate sales and different things like that, it has never been a better time to be collecting. I think it's unrealistic to say that people no longer want the theater experience. I just think that the world has changed when it comes to a matter of convenience. And if we continue to just spend on convenience, then that just proves statements like the ones that were made by Netflix, right? That we would rather everything just at the click of a button. The problem is you give up so much for that convenience. So you have to ask yourself the question, is it actually worth it? Is it actually worth it to have all of this access all under one roof? I personally fundamentally believe that if nothing else, that if something like this goes through, this will be the reason why piracy skyrockets. I think we are going to see piracy go through the roof if everything is housed under one roof. Because the people who do not support this, will not support this, and they will be forced to resort to other means to get their content and to get unblemished versions of said content. I do not promise that this will get more videos. I do not promise that I'll keep covering this as different developments come out, things like that. But it's a reminder that theaters are not a given, that physical media is not a given. And so while you can support it, while you have the ability to support it with your dollars before that opportunity is taken away from you, because do not get it twisted. It absolutely can be. All right, sound off below. Let me know what you think of all of this. Until next time, peace.